Hi guys, Ricky Pope here, and today on the Christian Nerds Unite podcast, I talk with Brian Godawa, screenwriter and author of the Chronicles of the Nephilim series of novels. Plus, scripture and nerdy news as always, and we'll get to all of that right after this. 2022 is flying by so fast, and I just reviewed my goals for the year. It's not too late to set some effective goals for 2022 for yourself. And the Goal Process 101 ebook helps you do just that. With a straightforward process and practical exercises, you'll be guided to set the right goals for you and set out a plan to achieve them. Get your copy of the Goal Process 101 ebook by going to goalprocess101.com. Use CNU2022 at checkout to save 10%. Now, back to the show. Brian Godawa has been a professional writer and filmmaker for over 15 years, and his most recent book is all about Moses and the Exodus. So for scripture today, I wanted to read through Exodus 3:11 through 15. But Moses said to God, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" And God said, "I will be with you, and this will be the sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain." Moses said to God, "Suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, 'The God of your fathers has sent me to you,' and they ask me, 'What is his name?' Then what shall I tell them?" God said to Moses, "I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites. 'I am has sent me to you.'" God also said to Moses, "Say to the Israelites, 'The Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has sent me to you. This is my name forever, the name you shall call me from generation to generation." And now some nerdy news. It's official. Twitter has accepted Elon Musk's offer of $44 billion to take over the company, and this will effectively make the company privately owned. Musk, who says he is a free speech absolutist, and also recently stated that if a tweet is offensive or if it's just in a gray area but not illegal, it should remain on the platform. This could mean lots of changes coming soon to the Twitter platform. Last month, DC had a big shakeup in its movie schedule, and this month, it's Sony's turn. Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, that was set to release on October 7th of this year, has now been pushed back to June 2nd of 2023. In its place, Sony has moved up Lyle the Crocodile, a live-action and CGI musical comedy adaptation of the children's book of the same name. Sony also announced that their Madam Web film, based on the Marvel Comics character from the Spider-Man Sony universe, will open July 7th, 2023, just a month after Across the Spider-Verse. Madam Web's character is multiversal, so it'll be interesting to see how she plays into the future of the Sony Marvel universe that they're trying to build. Paramount Pictures has announced that its Dungeons & Dragons movie will hit theaters on March 3rd, 2023, and it will be titled Dungeons & Dragons: Honor Among Thieves. The stars will include the likes of Chris Pine from the recent Star Trek movies and the Wonder Woman movie, Michelle Rodriguez from the Fast and the Furious franchise, and Hugh Grant, among many others. D&D's last theater outing was in 2000, and that was followed up by a Sci-Fi Channel made-for-TV movie in 2005 and a direct-to-DVD movie in 2012. it'll be interesting to see how they adapt this tabletop role-playing game to the big screen this time. I know last week I told you I was going to give you my spoiler review of the Batman this week, but due to some extenuating circumstances, that will have to wait a couple of weeks. So instead, I'm excited to share with you my latest interview with author Brian Godawa. Brian Godawa has been a professional writer and filmmaker for over 15 years, known for screenplays for Frank Peretti's The Visitation and To End All Wars, starring Kiefer Sutherland. A prolific writer with 15 novels in his Chronicles series and his popular book, Hollywood Worldviews, Watching Film with Wisdom and Discernment, is used as a textbook in schools. Brian, thanks so much for being on the Christian Nerds Unite podcast today.
Well, thanks for having me on, since I am a fellow nerd.
Always nice to see to meet a fellow nerd.
Yeah.
So let's start with, I mean, there's so many things I want to talk to you about, and I'm not quite even sure where to start. But let's start with this. You have been a screenwriter, and how did that kind of become part of your life?
Oh boy, yeah, that's going back some time. Well, I've always been an artist. So, but in my earlier years, my younger years, I was exclusively a visual artist. So I like to draw and paint and stuff like that. And I went to college actually to get a degree in illustration. So I was studying, and I ended up becoming a designer, a graphic designer, when I got out of college. But I had always, loved movies, and, quite frankly, it was in college where I read a evangelical author named Francis Schaeffer. Of course, he's now pretty old there. Many Christians may not even know about him, but he was one of the first Christian philosophers who addressed the sort of the populace, the popular people, but in an intelligent way. And he talked a lot about the arts. He believed in the arts, and he brought them into the discussion in a way that I'd never heard before. And I was a Christian, but I'd not understood how I didn't quite fully understand how to integrate my faith with my art, And of course, he also was very apologetics oriented, which I really enjoyed, apologetics. So reading his works is what, his complete works was what really helped me to see the value of how my Christian worldview, or how a worldview, is communicated through art, not through propaganda, although propaganda is one way of doing it. But I mean, powerful, universal type art, all of it communicates a worldview. And you just have to understand how that operates. And so when I learned that, I started seeing movies differently. And I started to see how their worldviews are communicated through that. And I just had a passion and desire. Man, I would love to see God's truth, communicate through storytelling and drama the way that I saw, the Hollywood movies communicating, right? And television, but mostly movies for me at the time. And so but I didn't go to school for it. So I had to, when I graduated and I got married, I started studying screenwriting on the side as a hobby, as my love, as my passion, and took a few years. Read all the books, went to all the seminars, and went to pitch meetings and stuff like that. And at that time, there was not that much out there. Nowadays, you got 100,000, 100 books on how to screenwrite, right? But at my day, there's only a couple. One was Sid Field, and there might have been one other one, But so that's basically what happened, and but I still was struggling with that, how to integrate that, my understanding of the worldview and such. And so, I started to write on the side, like I said, and then within a few years, I actually took a few more than that. It took a few years before I got my first movie made. And so that was To End All Wars, which came out in 2001 or so. And that was what launched my screenwriting career, which I continued to do graphic design as an artist, but then over the years things inverted, and I slowly my graphic design became the hobby, and my writing became full time. And so, that was how I got into it. But so it was all self-learned, and you just got to go out there and beat the streets and do everything you can and try to, and you know what? There's a lot of that is still going on today. I think it's still, if you have no contacts, I mean, in a very real sense, getting movies made does require relationships. And I would say probably that if it's one thing I wish I would have done more was networking, because I do think that it's a lot of it really is who you know. You've got the primary foundation of you have to be a good storyteller and a good writer. That's the base level. Everybody's that, or you're not going to be noticed at all. But that's not enough. It's not enough to be good. You've heard the phrase "cream rises to the top." Well, it doesn't. It's who you know that helps you get little breaks and get attention, because I can't tell you, I've read tons of great scripts that never got made as movies. So. It's a lot. It really is, but it wasn't really who I am. I'm not really a big networking guy. I'm not a big gregarious, person. I'm not a people person type of thing. So, but nevertheless, that's what started my career with that. But then, I'd say about 10 years ago, about 12 years ago, I had a couple bad years in screenwriting where I didn't make much money at all. And it forces you to reevaluate and sort of redefine yourself, reinvent yourself. And I started realizing, I've got to do more than just this. I got to reach out and I realized I should write a novel, I should write novels. But that coupled with the fact that I had a screenplay that I'd written that I thought would be a perfect combo in Hollywood. It was a Bible movie that Hollywood would like because it would be ancient and have all these fantastical creatures in it, like giants and stuff like that. And it was basically the story of Noah. And the script I wrote was Noah Primeval, and I was trying to get interested in it going around town. And that's when I discovered that Darren Aronofsky was already in the process of trying to make his movie. I thought, oh, well, I'm not going to, I don't have the connections like he does. So I thought, well, how can I beat him to the punch just in case he had something similar to mine, So I realized, well, I had to adapt it into a novel. And I did that, and it came out a couple of years before even his movie came out. But it was called Noah Primeval. And so that's when my novel writing career launched. And I didn't realize that it was going to be such a popular series. I ended up writing several series. The first one called Chronicles of the Nephilim. And I'm retelling Bible stories where giants or supernatural watchers and angels and demons sort of show up. And then Chronicles of the Watchers is another series that kind of the same stories, just you can sort of interweave them with Chronicles of the Nephilim. And then Chronicles of the Apocalypse, which is the origin story of the book of Revelation. And all these embody this supernatural component that I discovered when I was writing my first novel. And that's kind of where I am today. And we can, go into more depth in each of those, but that's sort of been my journey. As a writer, you just have to learn how to expand yourself. And, so now I'm a novel writer and a movie writer.
Awesome. Well, and we at Christian Nerds Unite, I absolutely love the art of storytelling. So whether that's in film or in novels or even when we're sharing the gospel evangelistically, it's all about storytelling.
Oh yeah.
And so let's get into that just a little bit. So this idea of taking biblical stories, but we're going to present them in a novel format. Now, as you said, you'd had this screenplay and you decided to turn it into a novel. What kind of decisions did you have to make to turn this into the kind of novel, the kind of story you wanted to tell, but to be truthful to the biblical narrative, but at the same time have enough liberty to tell a novel length story?
Oh yeah. Well, how do you integrate fiction with the Bible, God's word,
Yes.
Well, that actually was a difficult arena to participate in, because as a Christian, I do have a high view of Scripture, and I know that Christians also have a high view of Scripture, and that sometimes but they don't always, we don't have a history, let us say, of understanding the arts. Now, I do think things are a lot better now, and a lot better now. But at the time, I was a little concerned because I thought people are probably going to think you're playing with the Word of God, because here's what I was doing. I was retelling biblical stories, but I was doing a lot of historical research and mythological research into the other pagan religions of the day. And I was trying to retell the world of the Bible through the understanding of these of the Israelite worldview, but how it interacted as well with the pagan worldviews around it, like Canaan or Egypt, right? But I was adding a supernatural element that becomes risky because, of course, the Bible is supernatural.
Absolutely
it reveals in the Old Testament, certainly it reveals some of that, but not a lot. You get glimpses. An angel shows up and almost kills someone, or an angel shows up and kills, thousands of men. But what is going behind the curtain? We get little glimpses like Elisha's servant, who was worried that Jerusalem was going to be captured and destroyed by the Assyrians. And Elisha prays, and his servant's eyes are open, and he sees chariots in heaven of warriors. And the idea there, which is part of what I discovered, was that the Bible does talk about, and you can see this in Psalm 82, you can see it in Deuteronomy 32, this concept of the Gentile nations are under the authority of fallen watchers, called fallen sons of God, called the Watchers. And there's a whole, you hear about the Watchers in Daniel 4 specifically. It's the only place where the term Watchers is used, but it is. And then in Daniel 10, you also see what I think are the same kind of creatures. They're called because they're specifically princes of nations. And like you've got the prince of Persia, which is a spiritual entity over Persia fighting with the prince of Greece. And these are reflected in what's going on earth, meaning that was at a time when the earthly Persia was battling with earthly Greece. And so the concept here is an ancient one that a lot of the ancients believed in, which was that there are principalities and powers over spiritual principalities and powers over the earthly principalities and powers. So that if there's a war on earth, there's a war in heaven, right? And sometimes it might even be of a city, or of a king might have a principality over him. And so I did the study of this, and I was, my eyes were open like Elisha's servant when I read Michael Heiser's work, The Unseen Realm. Now, I read it before it became the book. He had it on the internet, and I just stumbled upon it, and he was just working on it at the time. So it was an early draft, and it just opened my eyes to this supernatural thread that goes through the Bible. And that concept of these watchers, it also ties to the notion of the giants that show up throughout the scripture. You got the giants of the Nephilim in Genesis 6. Then when, the spies spy out the land, you hear about the giants there and the Anakim, and they come from the Nephilim, which were the giants in Genesis. And like, what is all this stuff? And of course, there's Goliath, who's one of them, right? And you've got these, it's just this amazing, like, is this just strange anomalies? Well, no, they actually it does all work together in a theological thread that has to do with the war, what I call the war of the seed. And that is the war of Satan's seed trying to destroy the messianic seed, which would ultimately end with Christ, Well, that was this amazing supernatural storyline that it just blew my mind. And when I wrote the Noah novel based on that, and as I did the research, I realized, oh my gosh, this goes throughout the whole Bible, and there's a lot more stories I can tell. I thought I could tell at least 3 or 4 more. And of course, now I'm up to 16, right? So Yes. It's like, okay, there's a lot more than I realized, And my latest novel that just was released a couple months ago is Moses Against the Gods of Egypt. We can talk about that in a minute, but so it was this supernatural paradigm, and I thought, going back to your original question now, I thought, wow, I need to express this new understanding of the Bible. It excited me about the scriptures, and I want to share that with other Christians, but I knew it would be dangerous because they might think I'm playing with the Word of God, right? Because of course you have to fictionalize. If I'm going to say, well, what's going on in the spiritual realm while this stuff is going on in the earthly realm, you have that indication and you get glimpses, but not much, right? So
right.
I'm telling this whole fictional story of what's going on in the spiritual principalities and powers, and I thought that, I thought that it would be it would not be received well, but I was pleasantly surprised that that wasn't the case. I was received, and that's where I have to say that Christians end up having much better imagination than many people give them. Now, granted, I'm sure there are a lot of Christians who don't believe in the arts and aren't reading my book, so I'm not getting attacked by them, right? But I've sold a lot of books in the last 12 years, a lot, and so far I've got very little pushback on it because I think they get it. I'm not trying to play with the Word of God. I'm not trying to change it or anything. I'm trying to retell the Bible stories with this new understanding that is in the scriptures, but we don't necessarily see it because of our modern cultural bias, and that as that comes out, you get that supernatural understanding of the Bible. And I've had many Christians write to me and say, you've reinvigorated my love for the scriptures. I was getting dry, and you've helped me see them in a fresh way, and that's been very encouraging. But so the goal here is that because of my Hollywood background, I have as equal of a priority of telling an entertaining story as I do of telling a story that has theological truth. And the problem with a lot of Christian art, books included, is that they tend to see art as a means to an end of a sermon illustration or making a sermon in artistic medium, right? And that's where they fail. You have to learn how to embody or incarnate that worldview, not lay it on top of it like a sermon type of thing. Or you have to also understand that art is not a sermon, because a sermon, makes an argument and proves a point, and focuses on, communicating the lesson or the truth you want to communicate. It's more of a propagandistic approach. Nothing wrong with that. It's just propaganda is usually more of a singular viewpoint, right? That's what propaganda is. Whereas art is more open to, how shall we say, art is more about exploring the multiplicity of views within the world and showing how they all interact. Now it's through the drama, and you have the plot, which is what happens next, but it's through the human drama, the clash of characters who have different ways of seeing the world, and the choices they make, and what the results are of ideas and the results of behaviors. That is the incarnation of what you could call a logical argument. Like you can make an abstract argument and say, some way of seeing the world is wrong. It leads to such and such. Like you might say, when we dehumanize human babies, it leads to the genocide of killing more of them. Which, that's one way of arguing it. Or you could actually show people engaging in making their personal choices and justifying how they behave towards children, towards babies, and when you show that human drama, it has more impact, in my opinion, many times than an abstract argument. At least that's how my life has been. And
it's definitely a show versus tell kind of situation.
Yeah, in a way. I mean, there is a lot of telling when you're writing a story too. Now I'm
Right.
rambling, getting off onto the philosophical aspect of writing here, but storytelling. But it really is what drives me, because storytelling is so powerful, and I do believe Christians do understand it a lot better than they did 30 years ago. And even 20 years ago, and I'm impressed. I'm impressed and encouraged, because I see them getting it, and and that's great.
I come out of an artistic background. My undergraduate degree is in music, vocal performance, and I've done filmmaking myself. The poster behind me is a short film I've made, but I love the idea of creating a piece of art, a story that we're going to tell a story, and we're going to tell it in a very intelligent and entertaining way. And along the way, we're going to offer you a choice, and we're going to suggest which one we believe is right. But at the end of the day, you're going to have to make that decision.
Yeah.
And hopefully this story helps you get a better grasp while you're trying to make that decision.
Yeah.
And I think that's a way that I like to look at storytelling. But when you're looking at this storytelling, you said you've got to balance this idea of what's in the scripture and what's fiction and what is research. And I know you mentioned your brand new novel is Moses, and so tell us a little bit more about that, because I know you did quite a bit of research in order to just even begin to write that story, correct?
Well, yeah. For all my stories, one of the reasons why I think I've done well is I've explained to my readers where I get a lot of my ideas. I'm not very original. I do a lot of research in the ancient world, so I draw from ancient legends and ancient Second Temple Jewish literature, as well as surrounding pagan stories and legends and stuff. But it's all of it is in service to Aslan,
Yes.
right? And so that's what's called subversion. But so I thought that if I could, first of all, one of my favorite authors is Michael Crichton, and at the end of his novels, he would always give a little explanation of the real science behind the fiction that he's writing. And I thought, well, I want to do that with my theology. So I started writing appendices at the end of each of my novels, but then over time, I started getting so much research that I needed to have a whole book about the background to the novel for those who are interested. So it ends up being like a biblical research book, right? So, but I did that because I know that they would appreciate that like I would. And sure enough, it has proven to be the case. So for instance, I have a book, my new novel's Moses Against the Gods of Egypt. And I put out a companion book that's called The Spiritual World of Moses in Egypt. And that's where I explain a lot of my, historical and biblical research. And people really love it because there's just Christians love things explained to them. And sometimes people don't like that, but Christians do, and they, especially when you're talking about the scriptures, right? And if you're giving them something fresh and something different, it's like, whoa, are you making this up? And when they see you're not, they're more accepting of it. Case in point, a lot of what we think is biblical in our thoughts is actually not. It's more cultural.
How do you mean?
Well, let me give you a good example. We've got, our vision of Moses, it's basically based on Charlton Heston from the Ten Commandments, or maybe the Prince of Egypt cartoon, but
Depends on how old you are.
yeah, that's my generation. But I still love that movie. It's still great, but it's not very biblical in the end because there's a lot about it that isn't. And case in point is, you've got Charlton Heston, who's this larger than life, let my people go, this awesome, strong voice and a strong character. And, he really looks like a cool hero,
That wasn't Moses though.
So what I found out was that Moses actually had a stuttering problem. And it's in the scriptural text. He talks about, I'm slow of tongue and I'm uncircumcised of lips. And like, what is that? Just a metaphor for not being able to talk well? No, actually, if you look into the Hebrew, you see that elsewhere in the Bible that Hebrew language is used of stuttering. And so Moses had a stuttering problem. So I write about a Moses and I have him stuttering in my story. And that's a very different picture than that, let my people go, And what's cool about that is it makes him more human, more connecting to us.
Yes.
And there's a lot of that kind of stuff that I discover when I do my research that's not what we think it is. Another case in point, which, there's a lot that's up for debate about Moses. For example, who was the Pharaoh of the Exodus, right? That's a long scholarly argument, and there's different theories. But the most accepted one from that time of the 1960s even until now is Ramses. Ramses the Great, and so let it be written, so let it be done. And again, Yul Brynner was awesome as Ramses the Great, but there's been a lot of research and that I've drawn from, and discovered that actually that's the least likely Pharaoh candidate, certainly for those who believe in the Bible. And what's interesting is that candidate of Ramses as the Pharaoh Exodus has been a major cause of biblical skepticism, because in that time of Ramses, around 1250 or so, there is no evidence of Jews or Semites. Jews were Semitic peoples, right? So there's no evidence of Semites in Egypt. And there's no evidence of cities being conquered around 40 years later, around that time period when Joshua was supposed to go in the land. In fact, the archaeological evidence is that, the walls of Jericho did fall down and Hazor and all those others were burned, but like 300 years earlier. And so this brings up a lot of problems for Christians who believe in the Bible. But the research I did, and I followed another scholar whose name is David Rohl, Rohl. Now, he's not even a believer. He's not a Christian believer, but he argues for the basic historicity of the Bible against Christians who don't believe in the historicity of the Bible, right? So it's really fascinating. And, he makes all these arguments. It can get complex, but the short of it is that it actually can work out to being the traditional date of 1447, roughly, for the Exodus, which is what it used to be, a long time ago before they changed it to Ramses' day, right? And the pharaoh at that time, there's all kinds of debatable issues, but he comes up with a little-known pharaoh, Dudimos, who actually has only a few things written about him, but there is some interesting factoids about this Dudimos that actually can link him to things like a great plague in the time in that day of 1400s BC. So I did this kind of research, and so I bring that out into the book. I have, and it's not going to be the typical approach that many now accept. There's, like I said, no Ramses the Great and all that. So, but in some ways, I'm returning to the more traditional view of when the Exodus did occur, and that's what's kind of fascinating. So there's a lot of these elements that I like to bring in that help us change our view. Did you know that Moses was married to a black woman? You do. Many Christians do, but some don't. Or it's just a little factoid that you hear about because there's only one little verse in the book of Numbers, and it's a throwaway verse. Like Aaron and Miriam are mad at Moses, and they're like, because of you married the Cushite woman, and that's all you ever hear. Well, who's that, right? Well, Cush was in the land of Ethiopia. The Cushites were black, and Cush had a lot of issues with Egypt. And there is actually a story, not in biblical, but Josephus, a famous Jewish historian, talks about it, where Moses was a general in the army, and he conquers Cush because there were battles between Cush and Egypt at the time. And this princess of Cush falls in love with him and marries him as a treaty between Egypt and Cush, right? But then you have other problems, like why isn't she mentioned anywhere else? Why didn't she come with him, Is she Zipporah, the one wife that is mentioned? Well, Zipporah was a Midianite. Midianites are way over in Arabia. They're not Ethiopians. They're not Cushites, right? So how can how does that all work out? Well, what I try to do is in my fiction, try to make it workable for several viewpoints if possible. And that's the fun of the fiction side, where the scholarship doesn't really know for sure, but you have to kind of make it all work dramatically. And that was really fun, So in the mix of that, then people can see the scripture story from a fresh view that's not anti-biblical. Like the Exodus movie, Exodus Gods and Kings, right? Written by atheists, directed by an atheist, and distributed by atheists, right? It's like, and God is a temper tantrum throwing child, which of course that's what atheists think. This is what your God is like. He's like a temper tantrum throwing child. It's their mockery, right? And they take our stories and subvert them in Hollywood. Well, I want to do it back to them, And so I'm retelling the story, and you're seeing it from afresh, but with a biblical basis, at least for the arguments I'm making, And many people have said that, where it's like, oh, I never saw it that way, and now all of a sudden the whole thing opened up, and that's the human dramatic side of the story, and then there's the divine side of the story, the supernatural side. The inspiration that caused me to want to choose this story to write was Exodus 12:12, that says, Yahweh says, I will execute judgment upon the gods of Egypt. And you're like, is that, we tend to read over that and think of it as metaphor, right? But if this whole thing of the Watchers is true, that there are principalities over the pagan nations and that they're fallen watchers of some kind, the premise of all my series is, and it is speculation, but it's consistent at least with what we know of the Bible. And that is, what if the gods of the ancient world, Isis and Osiris in Egypt, Baal and Asherah in Canaan, what if they were these fallen watchers that talks about, in Psalm 82, Deuteronomy 32, and the Book of Enoch, which is not scripture, but it was, it is a book that's been respected by the church through all of history. What if this is true, or what if the gods of the ancient world were these fallen watchers masquerading as deities to draw worship away from Yahweh unto themselves? It would certainly fit within the paradigm of what's going on here. And so that's where I get the premise, is that I have these gods as at least having real demonic reality behind them. And that, they're masquerading as these gods, and they're telling creating their narratives of Isis and Osiris going to the netherworld and all this stuff. But they're doing it all as lies and deception in order to draw people away from Yahweh. So I have that in there. And then when you see these plagues come upon the land, it's not just this sort of abstract or metaphorical concept of, God is, judging the various elements of nature connected to the Egyptian gods, but the Egyptian gods are actually behind that spiritual cloak, and they're being judged with it, and so what might that look like, and so I try to give that a spin, and in a way that supports the biblical story. So you kind of have two stories going on at once, the historical biblical side, and then the behind the curtain, that's sort of the big picture of what I'm trying to do with it. And so far it's people are really enjoying it for its biblical consistency, as well as the imagination of it.
Awesome. Brian and I talked so long that I have to make this one a 2-part episode. Now, next week, we will get more into why Brian decided to focus on the Nephilim and on the Watchers. And we'll also talk more about storytelling in general and a lot about pop culture. You don't want to miss it. And if you want to connect with Brian or purchase one of his books, I've included links in the show notes down below. Check those out. Well, that's all I have for you today. Don't forget to like, subscribe, click, follow, check, click the bell. Just click all those links down there, whatever they are. That way you can keep up with us. And anytime we put out new content, you will be notified. And you can find all of our social links to our YouTube channel, as well as to our online store at ChristianNerdsUnite.com. And while you're there, click on the support tab. We would love to have you as a Patreon. Before you go, I do want to leave you with this blessing from 1 Thessalonians 5. May God himself, the God of peace, sanctify you through and through. May your whole spirit, soul, and body be kept blameless at the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ. The one who calls you is faithful, and he will do it. We'll see you next week. Blessings.